Hello and welcome back to the Movie Soup channel. Today I would like to share my thoughts on the movie titled The Power of the Dog from 2021. This video is full of spoilers, so beware. Let's begin. So the movie is conveniently split into 5 parts, which represent the following. First, introduction, the world according to Phil. Second, George finding his own way, Phil losing George. Third, Rose and George getting married, the torment from Phil begins. Fourth, Rose getting destroyed by the torment, Peter coming home and observing. 5. Rose not able to take any longer, George failing to confront Phil, Peter taking the matter in his own hands. The parts can also be viewed as following: full control, loss of control, vengeance, savior arrives, salvation. Let us break down each part in more detail. Part 1. We are introduced to all the main characters. Phil, who is the leader, and the world around him is kept on a tight leash. George, who is clearly out of his place, yet follows his brother's lead. The pack, obedient boys. Peter, a not-so-social teenage boy who has experienced a great trauma. Rose, a devastated mother and wife trying to make the ends meet and keep it together. We are shown more of Phil's dominance and demand for respect, not only from his peers but others around him as well. And George notices Rose, which he perceives as his way out, a life he's been looking for. Part 2. Phil starts to lose control as George and Rose are getting closer. Rose is struggling without her husband. George sees an opening, steps up, and fits in. First confrontation between Phil and George, Phil ignoring his brother's wishes, yet George chooses to ignore the situation entirely. George starts spending more and more time away from home and Phil decides to complain to their parents. Phil gets desperate. Part 3. Phil lost George. Rose is now living with them, not a warm welcome. Phil decides to torment Rose for taking his brother. We also see more of Phil's feelings towards Bronco, not just an old teacher or mentor, but something more. Phil has his happy place, secluded where he can drop the veneer, which he is always keeping on to try to look manlier than the rest around him. At the same time, as great as George's love and care for Rose is, it is completely overshadowed by Phil's torture of her. George tries to reason with his brother, yet is afraid of standing his ground. Phil not just lost his brother, George is against him now. Rose is introduced to the social circles George's family is part of, a striking contrast from Phil, almost a too high society for her, which adds to the torment. Phil's hostility becomes public when he joins the dinner party after Rose fails to entertain the guests. Rose is unprotected and defeated. Part 4. Peter comes back home to the ranch, their new home, to see what is happening to his mother. Phil continues to get worse, dirtier, and manlier, and Rose's only way to cope with Phil is by drinking and avoiding him completely when George is away. This state of things is slowly killing Rose and drives George away from it all. Phil perceives Peter as another way to get back at Rose and considers the best way to exploit him. We also get to see what kind of person Peter is, fragile on the outside, emotionless, decisive, and driven on the inside. At the same time, we get to see the other side of Phil, his emotions, and Peter happens to find his secret place in his magazines, which Phil notices. Part 5. When Phil's crew openly mocks Peter, his mother and father choose to ignore the situation, so Phil decides to step in and try to get a relationship going with the boy. Presumably to further torment Rose, he starts to teach Peter, share his thoughts and secrets with them. Peter knows how to play along. Exhausted Rose now believes she is losing her son. This drives her mad. Peter, being very attentive and decisive, sneaks out to find the cow that died from the black anthrax. Rose gets desperate when she sees Peter and Phil riding out together. She believes she has lost her son to Phil. When out together, we can see Phil genuinely getting involved with Peter. We also see how emotionless Peter is and hear the story of his father's passing. Phil cuts his arm when catching the rabbit, which does not go unnoticed by Peter. Get back at Phil, Rose gives the hides away to the Indians, and then collapses, having reached her limit. Nothing and no one to fight for. Upon finding this out, Phil gets angry, yet George fails to assume his dominance and protect Rose. in Peter's eyes. Peter decides he has to take the matter in his own hands, spends the entire evening with Phil, sees no compassion towards his mother, and poisons the water. Phil dies shortly after. Within a matter of a few minutes, we stop thinking about Phil as a cruel torturer and start feeling sorry for his lost and fragile soul. He seemed to truly care for the kid and was looking for love, yet got disposed of. Peter believes he saved his mother and their family. As far as the title goes, The Power of the Dog, if we read the extract from the King James verse, "Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious from the power of the dog," the following parallels can be made with the movie: sword, Roman government, prosecution, poison rope. Darling, my precious, my only one, Rose. Dog, a foe, those who crucified our Savior, Phil. God, the one who takes no action, George. In my opinion, the movie is about blind righteousness. Phil is shown as an enemy of the dog most of the movie, and yet no one from his family attempts to better understand his motives. I like the idea, but I would have preferred if the 2+ hours of the runtime were used to better portray Phil's internal struggle via more means than just repeating harassment towards Rose, seclusion, and hard work. Also, we are shown very little of George's struggle and motivation. I understand he is not a central character to the story, according to the final cut of the movie that is, yet he is most certainly crucial to the main plotline. The Peter's story arc is nicely covered and well introduced, but a little less inactivity replaced with motivation and actions towards the ultimate goal would have been nice to see as well. As for Phil himself, I believe the choice of using Benedict Cumberbatch for this role was to better portray him as an outsider, someone who doesn't fit the mold of a typical cowboy yet tries very hard to be just like and even better than the rest, but I could not stop and get distracted by his accent. I like him as an actor, but I think the character would have benefited greatly from a more suited cast. Last but not least, this movie is built around a twist in the end, which is nice, but it also undermines the entire build-up and replaces a more meaningful and impactful ending with an easier one. I would have liked to see an ending where Peter gets close with Phil and their relationship becomes something to deal with, destroying their entire family. Thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next one.